Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, a grizzly bear's journey from cub to adult, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Eddie Savage. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Eddie. I'm going to hand things off to you.
Well, thank you very much. It is absolutely delightful to be back and chatting to all of you fabulous Natural Habitat Adventures guests. This presentation, well, first off, I want to say for those of you tuning in who signed up for the first one last week, I am very sorry that I missed that. I got an early morning call that the sailboat that I'm living on right now was going to capture a weather window and travel for about 5 hours, leaving at 8 a.m. Around from North Vancouver into the Fraser River and over to a marina where they'll lift the boat out of the water and put it onto dry dock. So that's what I ended up doing. And unfortunately, it makes it really hard to do a presentation when you're on a moving sailboat and also like part of the crew dismantling some of the forestays and whatnot so they could get it into the lift. So that's where I'm presenting from today, actually, is this 80-foot sailboat. I am located in the Shelter Island Marina and Boatyard on the edge of the Fraser River. And I'm excited to tell you that the boat is not moving, and I'll be able to present very calmly and consistently today instead of crashing through the waves outside of Vancouver. So journey of a grizzly bear. You may recognize this photo, and I like this photo when I talk about bears because it's such a close-up photo of bear fur. And you know, something that often comes up in conversations that I have on my trips is kind of like wildlife viewing ethics, and you know, what's good, what's bad, what's too much, what would be considered wildlife harassment versus wildlife viewing. And I'm a firm believer that anything that you do around bears, like a good bear viewing situation, is a bear viewing situation where that bear didn't even see you, or that bear saw you but was like, whatever, you know, they're way over there and they're super calm and relaxed, and I don't need to worry about them as a threat. And so this photo here, it was in my last presentation about the Great Bear Rainforest. This photo here, this super close-up, was taken from a viewing platform that was elevated. It was actually what's called a tree stand. So it's this viewing platform that's elevated up in a tree. I was about 15 feet off the ground, and luckily a grizzly bear came along, saw us up there, but we were super quiet and still, and didn't really mind our presence, or so it seemed, and just continued walking right along and underneath the stand. So I could swing my telephoto lens down over the side, and I quickly focused on the fur and took a photo of that bear's fur. So I wasn't riding the bear, I wasn't chasing the bear. I didn't tackle it, hold it down, and get someone to snap this picture. It was a bear that very calmly walked underneath of a viewing platform that I was in, which was pretty cool. And you could do this too with any bear encounter that is kind of close proximity. If you have the right telephoto lens, you just, instead of focusing in on the bear, you have to make that decision that you're going to focus on the fur and just take a picture, which is what I wanted to do here because it makes a really sweet background. So with that being said, let's kind of cruise along here. Oh, what's going on? There's a little bit of lag here, it looks like. Kendall, you there? Is this working?
I still see your opening slide.
Okay, give me a sec.
Yeah, we'll try it again.
There.
Here you go.
Did that go? Okay.
Yep.
Hey, so that's me. Thanks. Thanks, Kendall. So that's me with the beard and the puffy jacket there. I've been working with NatHab since 2016. I got hired back then to, or basically I started working with them up in Churchill doing polar bear trips, and quickly our relationship blossomed from just doing polar bear trips to also leading Northern Lights expeditions, Churchill summer expeditions with beluga whales, and then the China trips. Back in 2019, I started doing their wild Switzerland expeditions. And well, this year I haven't done anything yet, but I think we all know why. But very, very excited for future trips with NatHab in the future. My background prior to working with NatHab, and also while I've worked with NatHab, is predominantly in the Great Bear Rainforest region and around Vancouver Island. So I actually started guiding back in 2008. This would make year 13 for me of guiding, everything from kayak guiding to hiking guiding to grizzly bear viewing and whale watching and all that kind of stuff. And today I can happily say that I've got about a decade's experience talking about bears in particular. Just about a decade's experience talking about bears in particular, and they're definitely up there as one of my favorite species, if not my favorite species. So the other gentleman in this photo is Philip. He is our local partner he is our local partner in China for our Wild Side of China expedition, which is a phenomenal trip, and I highly recommend it when we can travel again. So the journey of a grizzly bear. Now, I selected this presentation because I'm super inspired by this one particular bear in this photo. This is the star. The bear you see on your screen is the star of this presentation. This is a bear that folks in my circle working in the Great Bear Rainforest and in this one particular region in Glendale Cove refer to as Amber. This year she would be, well, she was born in 2013, so she would be turning 8 years old, or I guess, no, 7 years old this year, which would make her pretty much an adult bear. I didn't actually get a chance to head into the region where she resides, and so I didn't get an opportunity to see her this year, which is the first in many. Tear running down my face for that one. But I selected this bear because there's been a lot of really interesting things that have happened in her life. And there's a very good chance that, folks, you've probably seen this bear already. I'll throw out a couple of big ones. If you've seen Disney Nature Bears, there are some scenes where Amber here and her brother, who in the film they call Scout, and who in the film they call the mother Sky, I believe, Sky, Amber, and Scout. You would have seen her in that film. Another one is there was recently a really critical and important bear research program that came out, and it's called the Bear ID Project, where they've learned to facially recognize grizzly bears. And so this bear was actually featured in, I think, the Washington Post, CNN, the New York Times, the Smithsonian. Her face is one of the ones that's used for that. So that's kind of how famous this bear already is without actually knowing much about her background. And so I'm going to kind of talk about everything from when I first saw this bear back in 2013, and we're going to go through her whole life up until 2020, this year, and kind of talk about the different things that have not only happened to her, but her family, the things that I've learned about bears by watching this bear, and also the things that other people maybe have experienced or learned by watching this one particular bear. Okay, so let's get started. Yes, the disclaimer. And pretty much every single picture in here, unless it says otherwise or I tell you otherwise, is of this bear Amber. So I'll just start here, the disclaimer for this, and I go over this very, very thoroughly whenever I'm doing bear viewing, is bears are not pets. And so just because I'm using a name on this bear doesn't mean that I have any personal connection to this bear, or I'm emotionally thinking like, if I was to walk through the forest and come across Amber, I look at her as a friend. I don't. I look at Amber still as a wild grizzly bear, but instead of using bear, 06B as a code, call her Amber. Everyone can say, oh, did you see Amber today? Or have you seen Amber in the cove lately? Or, oh, I saw Amber over there feeding on mussels. The region where I work, there's probably about 10 to 15 bears that I can facially recognize or recognize from a distance by body color, shape, and face. And especially when I'm in it and I'm seeing the bears kind of on a regular basis, I can really get that. And so instead of using these codes, we use something much more familiar to humans, which is names. And typically they're the bears that get names. They're named after local geographic features. So for example, there's a couple of bears. They're two sisters that we call Flora and Lillian. Flora Peak is a mountain, and then if you're looking at the top of the mountain from the ocean and look down to the water, there's a gigantic boulder, a glacial erratic, that is called Lillian Rock. And so that's where those names came from. So normally that's how it goes, but because this bear, when she was 6 months old, made it into an international feature film, and they called her Amber, that's why we used Amber. And everything that I say and do in regards to bears is with the utmost respect. In particular, bear viewing. There's everywhere you go, there needs to be a really important bear viewing policy, so that you know when to get, or you know when that bear is feeling stressed. You never really want to get to the point where a bear is stressed because of your presence, but you can tell when they're showing their kind of non-verbal signs that maybe they're a little bit stressed, maybe you're a little too close. And so with that, I always abide by very strict bear viewing policies and give them space and make sure that they're comfortable and make sure that they may be laying still or standing there still, but their heart rate's not super pumping and they're about to rush into the bush. I think a good bear viewing experience is one where you can sit there, observe the bear is doing the bear thing, and then when you leave, the bear is still there doing the bear thing. So I have a huge amount of respect for them, and I think that one of my personal mission statements is to get that word out and share through different venues of education that bears are to be respected, not necessarily to be feared, but to be respected and appreciated in any environment. So moving forward, as I kind of mentioned prior, why I want to use this bear in particular is because there's been so many different things that have happened to her in her life. She's been the feature of a lot of things, but also for me as a bear viewing guide, this bear I've seen every single year that I've gone back. And so as my admiration and respect for grizzly bears grew and flourished, this bear was aging right along. And so it's almost like this particular bear is like a case study of my growth and knowledge when it comes to grizzly bears. And one thing for sure is that you can't really expect anything. I mean, the one thing you can expect is to expect the unexpected with bears, and in particular, this bear really did that. But I'm just going to tell you about this one particular bear as well, because I feel like when it comes to respecting bears and understanding bears and maybe thwarting different things like trophy hunts and whatnot, which is a super contentious issue and something that has been banned in British Columbia, and it's no longer allowed in Alberta because they've got like less than 1,000 grizzly bears left in Alberta. And then, but it's still going on in different parts of Canada and North America. I want to emphasize that a bear, in itself, a bear, whether it's a grizzly bear, black bear, or polar bear, is not necessarily this mean, vicious animal of the woods that is basically out to hunt and kill. That is the complete wrong portrayal of bears. But a bear is actually an individual that has a life story, and their personality. Each bear, in my opinion, bears do have personalities through observation. And I'm talking about literally thousands upon thousands of hours of bear observation. These bears, they do have kind of these personalities and these learned behaviors that are learned from a lifetime of experience. They don't just show up when they're a cub and they're just like, yep, I'm a bear, I'm good to go. There's a lifelong journey that they go on where they're always learning and changing to become an adult bear, and then that the learning continues all the way through until the end of their lifespan, between 20 and 25 years old. So I really want to emphasize that there's a lot more to a bear than just this big animal that's wandering through the woods. There's a lot more. So I hope you can kind of pick up on that as I work my way through the presentation. So bear with me. Some of these pictures are embarrassing. You get that? I hope so. I'm just dropping puns in this sailboat all by myself. But some of the first pictures that I ever took when I started bear viewing were taken on a very simple point and shoot. I was still learning. I also, when I was kind of working in this region and still work in this region, it's really where I met a lot of photographers and kind of started to develop my photography skills. And so you'll really have to bear with some of these grizzly shots. They are embarrassing, like I said. I appreciate you doing that for me. Enough puns. I'll have to claw myself back to the presentation here. I'm just imagining like everybody laughing so much, but really, like I said, it's just me sitting in this sailboat by myself. So
I'm laughing, Eddie.
Thank you, Kendall. So with this photo that you're looking at here, this is the bear family. On the right, the large bear is a bear that we know as, or that I know as Bella. She's a female. In this shot, she would have been kind of in the 15 to 17-year-old range. Today, she's in her kind of early 20s, and she's what we would classify as an old bear now. She's had many sets of cubs. These two were not her first. And then the two cubs that we're looking at, this is Amber, and we call her brother Frank. So different from the movie for different reasons. Bella got her name like 10 years before Amber and Frank even appeared on scene. But away we go. So Bella, Amber, and Frank, that's the family that we're looking at here. These cubs in this shot are probably about 6 months old. So grizzly bear cubs, I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but they're born during hibernation in the den. They show up and they're about the size of a water bottle, like a little Nalgene, maybe 1.5 pounds. They've got microscopic hairs on them. They're blind, toothless, and essentially helpless. And something that I call the den is kind of like it's an external womb, in the sense that these cubs cannot leave the den when they're born. If they leave the den, they will die in the elements. And so it's kind of like this opportunity for mom to feed them very rich, fatty milk so that they can grow to about 20 pounds before they leave the den in the springtime and head down, and time that den departure with this spring kind of growth. And so the food that they're eating here, and the food that these two cubs are looking so closely at, you see how intently they're watching what mom's doing, is called Lingby's sedge. So Lingby's sedge in the springtime, it grows abundantly in coastal estuaries, all the way from Alaska down to I would imagine around Oregon or at least southern Washington. I don't know the range off the top of my head for Lingby sedge, but in the springtime it contains about 25% crude protein in the new growth. And so bears, instead of going around and you know, really there's not a lot of easy, simple food sources around, but they'll spend hours and hours of the day chewing and eating the sedge just to gain enough calories to kind of scrape by. So a bear family like this, they might spend, you know, 10 to 16 hours of their day eating sedge and other bits and pieces. So here's your bear family: Bella, Amber, and Frank. Let's Oh yeah, and I threw these in here because I wanted to show you a younger version of me back when I was a doughy-eyed bear viewing guide, just trying to figure things out. So on the right, that's back in 2013. You know, always had the beard, but not the knowledge. And then on the left, this is 2016. So kind of my development from novice guide to very animated and excited grizzly bear guide. And I'm way more animated now than in that left one, by the way. I throw things. It's great. So let's talk about Bella, the mother, for a second. So this picture here, there's actually 3 cubs wrapped around her. So after Bella and Frank were weaned in 2015, Bella was breeding that year, and in 2016 she came back with 3 cubs of the year. So 3 of them. You can see there's one just under her chin, one kind of nestled in her belly. You see the ears poking up, and then the third off to the right, kind of laying on the rock there. So Bella, she's a female that has grown up or has spent her entire life in very close proximity to Glendale Cove. The place where I was working, by the way, it's called Night Inlet Lodge, and so in that region, basically all the bear viewing tours kind of depart from there, and then we spend most of our time probably within about 5 kilometers of that location and go to different areas looking for bears, but predominantly or primarily we're in Glendale Cove. So if you're looking at Google Maps and you want to see where I'm talking about, look up Glendale Cove. So Bella, she's about 22 years old now, but as far as we know, because the lodge has been operating in the same region for over 2 decades, there's been kind of this consistent observation of this bear through her entire life. And so we know without kind of substantial evidence of like saying, yep, she was born then, we know that this particular bear has been in this region for at least 20 years, if not a little bit more. And then also looking at her physical characteristics, we can also kind of gauge just about how old she is. So she actually, we believe she dens not far, maybe 6 or 7 miles away from the cove up in the mountains. And she spends most of her time in this cove, Glendale Cove, around the corner in a place called Siwash Bay, and potentially in another bay called Hayden Bay, which is a bit more of a walk away. She's had many sets of cubs, and the ones that were prior to Frank and Amber ended up being Thor and Freya. I'm not sure if she had 2 prior to them, but I do know that Bella has had at least 3 sets of cubs, total of 7, if not more, cubs in that time. And she's what I would classify as a really capable grizzly bear mother. Super protective of her cubs, very smart about keeping her cubs away from danger, always aware, always alert. This is a picture of her, I believe in 2000 and, gosh, what year was this? This would have been last year, 2019. She had no cubs with her. She kicked out those 3, and she had no cubs with her, and she's down on the beach rolling rocks over, eating mussels and barnacles in the intertidal zone in the cove. And here's her next to a big glacial erratic. That rock, by the way, is no small rock. Bella probably weighs around 350 pounds when she's good and healthy. So she's not a small bear, but yeah, that's her there. Let's talk about Frank. This is like one of my all-time favorite photos of a bear, and you have to look closely, but you can kind of tell that it's a tiny bear. Short little legs, short little torso in comparison to the size of the head. But so Frank, the brother, he's got his own story going on. Males typically roam farther than females. So Frank kind of disappeared from the scene really in like 2017, 2018. I didn't see him. I was there in 2018. I didn't see him in 2018. I'm not sure if he came through in 2017. but he has been recently spotted quite a ways away, actually, on Vancouver Island. We believe it's him, from photos that we've compared to photos when he was younger. So he's moved quite a ways, probably about 100 miles away from where he grew up with Amber and Bella. But this is a shot of him when he was 2.5 years old, recently weaned by Bella, so kicked out of the comfort and safety of mom. No more free room and board. And he went because he was small. He was having a really hard time kind of keeping up in some of the more densely populated areas with bears. A little bear will always get chased. Mostly it'll always get chased by bigger bears. It's kind of like the grizzly bear hierarchy. And so Frank got chased around the corner with Amber. They both ended up around the corner here. And at low tide, they were feeding on these really thick beds of mussels. They eat lots and lots of these. They crunch them up, shell and all. And inside, of course, there's the actual mussel flesh, which gives them a good amount of protein. It's a food source, probably not the optimal food source, which is why they're all the way kind of out of the core area, especially where that Lingby sedge is. But it's something to get them by until they can sneak in and dodge the bigger bears and get in and get some sedge. Here's another shot of him. This was him in 2016. So you can see already he's starting to look a little bit bigger, especially in the shoulder. And from reports, I don't know how accurate these are, because when it comes to people looking at a bear and saying, yeah, we think it weighs about this much, but reports were suggesting that the Frank that ended up on Vancouver Island, in a tiny little estuary, it kind of really tucked away. Estimates were coming in that he was like an 800-pound bear, which is big. It's really big. And he would only be 7 years old. So I'm kind of skeptical that he would be 800 pounds. And I think that was like an observation. The old story when you catch the fish at the lake and it's a foot long, and then when you get to the truck, it's a 1.5 feet long, and then you get home and it's 2 feet long, and then when you get to the bar, suddenly you caught a 3-foot fish at the lake. That kind of thing, I feel like happened with Frank. I'd say he could very well be a 500 to 600 pound bear, but 800 would be a bit crazy, in my opinion. Really fast growing, must have had his Wheaties. And here's a nice photo of from 2016, Frank and Amber. Amber is the one on the right-hand side there. And if there's one thing that's been consistent throughout their entire relationship, it is that Amber and Frank wrestle quite a lot. And so here's Frank getting a pot of the head. And if you look closely, you can actually see there's water flying off. So it was a pretty good smack from the sister in the head out in the estuary. So let's get talking about Amber. So Amber here, she's on the left. Got this handy dandy circle. This is her when she was 6 months old. Her brother Frank, of course, on the right. She is super tiny, probably weighs about 25 or 30 pounds. 2013, when she's this size, she was the subject of Disney Nature bears. And so this photo is actually very, very sharp, kind of seemingly computer graphic-y photo type thing. That wouldn't be Amber. For Disney Nature bears, they had 2 different sets of mums and cubs, if not more, that they filmed. One of them was up in Alaska, because the film itself is set in Alaska and in some of those big plains type estuaries, and up high into the mountains. And some of the more kind of coastal and forest shots were shot with Amber. But she was the feature of Disney Nature bears. That's where she kind of got her first shot into the limelight. And so this is a shot from the Disney Nature Bears trailer, and that's Bella, and that is potentially Amber or her brother. there. But if you look closely at this picture, it might not be very clear, but the way that I know this is them is if you look at the mom and you look right inside that circle, there's a tiny little nick on her nose. There's a little scar, and that is a teller for who Bella is. So that's Bella, and that's one of her cubs, either Amber or Frank. So she, in her first year of life, she had a lot of exposure there. She kind of was not followed around, but I wouldn't say followed around, but we really get to know kind of bears' behaviors. They're definitely creatures of habit in many ways. Sometimes they'll walk the same trail every day for weeks at the same time. If they've got a good thing going, they won't change it. And so we kind of got an idea of where she was, and the Disney Nature film crew was there. And by the way, the Disney Nature film crew was always with an expert bear guide. Actually, one of them was Moira Lepaterel. She was often paired with Disney Nature, the Disney Nature crew, as well as Dr. Melanie Clapham and John Kitchen, who are both excellent bear researchers that were, and Dr. Melanie Clapham still works at the lodge and in that region studying bears now for over a decade. But they're always with those crews. So again, going back to ethical filming or ethical behavior, and when it comes to bear viewing and wildlife viewing. So that's pretty cool that was kind of part of her first year of life. There's another picture of Amber back in 2013. There's a lot of learning in the first year of a cub's life. To really catch salmon themselves, they really don't know anything when they're that young. They have no experience in life. They don't really know how to be a bear, and so their best bet is to just follow mom and learn from mom. And I like this photo because it kind of, there's a bit of a human factor here, which maybe is Bella's feeling a little tired after dealing with the little ones for a little bit, for quite some time. So these cubs, Amber and Frank and Bella, Amber and Frank would have to follow Bella around that entire first year and basically watch and learn and try to stay focused as best they can. They had to stay right next to their mom. If you notice, like most pictures, those two cubs are like right next to mom, because if they were to venture too far away from her, they could risk kind of getting separated. And if you're a bear that size and you get separated at that age from your mom, there's really a 0% chance, a very close to 0% chance that you're going to be capable of surviving as a cub like that. And so the first year of their life, the first year of Amber's life, she was following Bella super close. Touch is really important. Suckling regularly. Suckling is actually something that could be used by bears, or we theorize it could be used by bears as a way of calming the cubs down. Like if there is a very stressful situation, if maybe another bear walked out and kind of frightened them, and the cubs had to run over and they're like panicking and looking around, Bella might just take them around the corner into a quiet spot and suckle them, and that would calm them down. It would allow kind of them to feel safe and comfortable, so they can continue the learning process. Always right next to mom, trying to figure out what to eat, where to go. So much learning is going on in that first year of life. These are some of my first pictures, but always right next to mom. That's a tiny little bear. So those bears, the trio, they did really well in that first year. In 2000, oh, I didn't change the date on this one. So it's actually 2014 is when they're yearlings. But in 2013, when they were cubs of the year, Bella did a really great job finding lots of salmon, lots of food. They all gained a lot of weight. In British Columbia, typically the mortality rate among cubs is about 50%. So 1 in 2 bears, 1 in 2 cubs of the year will make it through that first year of life. It's the highest spike in mortality rate for bears. But something about Bella, like I was saying, she's kind of a super mom in the sense that since I've known about her, every year she's come back with all of her cubs. In the sense that if she left in the winter time with 2, she came back in the spring with 2. Or like the last time I saw her in 2013, she came back in 2014 with 2, and then she did that again with her next set of cubs, etc. So she's kind of what's classified as a super mom in that sense. Very, very good. But 2014, kind of the yearling year, is when grizzly bears really start to kind of branch out, and they're feeling a lot more confident. They're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger. They already know where the sedge is. They've already rolled rocks and found those mussels and barnacles and little crabs and fish under there. So there's a lot that's already been done, and they're starting to feel a little bit more confident. But really, I find that 2014 is kind of a year where they learn how to negotiate around other bears. And so in this picture, you can kind of see Bella with her 2 cubs. The 2 cubs are like freaked out, kind of standing up. It's not necessarily that it's a form of, it's a threat or anything like that. It's like they want to have a really good look at whatever this is. If they were standing down on all 4s, they wouldn't be taller than the sedge, so they couldn't see it. So they've got to stand up, have a good look. And then you can get a lot from Bella, who's kind of got her ears up, eyes focused, and this other bear is just kind of walking on. So it's a seemingly exciting encounter, which it sure is, but it was actually pretty relaxed because that other bear ended up walking on, and then Bella kind of took a few steps towards it. It was a much smaller bear. And then Bella took a few steps towards it, and then it bolted into the bush. And then the cubs, being like, oh, that's how it works, Bella and Frank ended up giving chase where Bella didn't. So that's, if you can kind of see, that's kind of a lesson right there, is like the 2 cubs went chasing after this bear while Bella was like, nah, we don't need to do that. So that would be kind of some of the learning that happens when they're a yearling cub. And also, after any stressful encounter, when they're yearlings, and this goes for most grizzly bears, they're still suckling. So even though they're a year and a half and they're starting to approach kind of nearly the height of their mom, and they do start to look like pretty big bears, they're definitely still suckling. And whether they're going to get a lot of nutrients from that at this stage in life is not that important, but it is, like I was saying, it's more about kind of stress reduction and caretaking of those cubs. So Bella's laying on the ground here. They must have just had a stressful encounter because she's way out in the open, and she's got these 2 year-and-a-half-old cubs suckling when there's lots and lots of food around. So it's likely calming them after a very stressful encounter. And then another thing that really started to pop up in 2014 when they're yearlings is they are starting to wrestle and size each other up. So these 2, they ran. Bella gets the game. She's energy conserving. She's not even in the picture because she's still eating sedge, and she's got to. She's a big bear. While these young bears, they're still cubs. They're only a year and a half. Take off and they go and wrestle. And do some sparring. So lots and lots of play at this age, like lots of play. And it's hard it seems to be a challenge for mom to kind of reel them in and make sure that they're focusing on what's really important. Here's some more shots of them playing. So they're swimming through the river, and I was in a boat on the opposite side of the river. This is with a telephoto lens, of course. And they basically, one would like swim ahead, and then the other would chase and like kind of claw the back, and then the one that was ahead turned around and gave the other one a swat, and it would just basically trade places like this. And Bella kind of wanted to move, but Frank and Amber were a little bit distracted with their own game here. Now, something super cool, and this is like by far, it's got to be in like one of the in the top 5 coolest things that I've ever observed with grizzly bears, and it was super exciting to see in 2014. We had a run of around 300,000 salmon in 2014, which is a pretty good number for that area, and 300,000 pink salmon. But we had an extremely hot summer, and the rain didn't really come, but the fish had already gone up the river. There was like a heavy rain in the middle of the summer that cooled the water down, and the salmon are just like, yep, we're going up. The salmon got into the river, and then there was no more rain to keep the water cool. And so what happened was there's so many fish in the river, not enough cold water and water depth, that basically the salmon began to suffocate because it was too warm and there wasn't enough oxygen in the river, so in the water. So about half of the run, 150,000 fish is what we estimated, they died before they had the opportunity to spawn, which isn't great for the salmon, but let me tell you how great that is for everything else. The bears had a field day. There was a lot of salmon feeding going on. There was a lot of birds, eagles. I think one morning I counted well over 60 eagles in the estuary, just kind of sitting up in the trees and looking around. And then anytime you go up the river itself, there's just a constant, it's like a highway. The river, the kind of gap between the trees over the river is like a highway of eagles going back and forth, commuting from one food source to another. Lots and lots of gulls. But something really interesting happened, which kind of blew me away, and then also was super fascinating to the researchers that I was working with, Dr. Melanie Clapham and John Kitchen. And that was, we started to notice different family groups and different ages of bears, of grizzly bears, starting to play together. And so in this picture here, you see there's 4 cubs. They're from 2 different families. So what was happening in this scene is we had Bella, Amber, and Frank on, let's say they're on the left side, and then we had another bear and her 2 cubs. The 2 females went and sat together and were feeding on dead fish, while the 4 cubs all started wrestling together. And so I was lucky enough to be there and observe this, and the 2 moms were like not even worried about what was going on. In a lot of different situations, you'd think, wait, grizzly bears are solitary creatures. What is this? The only time they're not solitary is when they're with a mother, like it's a mother and cub family group. So what's with these 2 family groups starting to play together and like it being okay, and there's no stress triggered? And it's actually started a lot of different questions in my head. Like, in British Columbia and Alaska, because we have commercial fishing and logging and all of these different things that affect salmon runs, something that I've often thought about is like, what would bears be like with ample food sources in super high densities? It's like the perfect combination, or it's the perfect scenario for social behavior to begin happening. And maybe 200 years ago, before salmon fishery exploitation started, we did have multiple family social interaction, and maybe there's a lot more bear interaction, social interaction, that we just didn't see. This to me is kind of like maybe what happens when the food source is so abundant and the animals are so well fed that they perhaps don't need to spend as much energy on eating, but they can actually spend more energy on less critical things like social behavior. So it gets much better than this. I'll point out that a paper did come from this, from Melanie Clapham and John Kitchen, and it was part of the Brown Bear Research Network, which was kind of like it was the foundation of what is today, or it's been transferred into the Bear ID project. Kind of they switched their scope, but social play in wild brown bears of varying age and sex class was the paper. You can look that up. Look up the authors, Dr. Melanie Clapham and John Kitchen, and you will find this. It's a really fascinating read. These are some pictures of mine that made it into that paper, of the play encounters. And it gets better than this. It wasn't just a female and 2 cubs and a female and 2 cubs. If you look in this picture, how many bears do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 bears. There's an extra one, isn't there? Mom and 2 cubs times 2, it equals 6, and then there's an extra one. So flipping through my photos from this experience with Bella, Frank, and Amber, I actually noticed that, and like it's been some time since I really looked at this, I actually noticed that there was also 2 2.5-year-old bears that we know, and I mentioned earlier, as Flora and Lillian. These 2 female bears kind of came in from the other side of the estuary and ended up joining in the wrestling, to the point where you had like the 2 moms that were kind of wrestling together. You had, and like this cluster of 6 young bears, 6 or 4 1.5-year-old bears, and then 2 2.5-year-old bears all playing together. It was kind of like this extremely rare and unique grizzly bear social interaction that kind of blew me away. And wouldn't you know it, Amber was right at the heart of that. That's just one of the photos. So Amber is right in the middle there. Her brother Frank, I believe, is on the left, and then the bear on the right is another one of the 1.5-year-old cubs from that scenario. Super cool. So here's a picture, here's a picture of Amber when she had just been kicked out by Bella. So 2015, she was weaned and on her own, and I say sort of because, well, it's fairly common for grizzly bear cubs, or what are classified then as sub-adults, to basically stick with their litter mate. So in this case, Amber stuck with Frank, and for most of the year in 2015, they were seen all over the place, kind of traveling together. And this is something we believe is to help them with their size and their lack of dominance in the grizzly bear hierarchy. They're both very small bears, and they both are very inexperienced bears. And so by sticking together, 2 is greater than 1. They can kind of have each other's back, have some company, because being a bear is quite an ordeal. And so here we've got Amber standing in the river. She had just run down about 100 meters of this river chasing salmon, and the water's only like 4 inches deep, and there's lots of pink salmon kind of working their way up. But because of her inexperience in this moment, she did not catch a salmon, which is just the way it goes for a young bear like that. And this shot, so if you can imagine, like from this shot of Amber, pan left to the other side of the river, that's where her brother Frank was. And you can actually see a difference in their faces now. See, Amber's much more blonde in the face, and Frank kind of has this kind of a blonde collar with a darker face. And then the snout is also quite a bit longer in Frank versus Amber. Amber's got quite a short snout. So this partnership lasted for most of 2015, kind of everything from eating sedge to walking along the beach and rolling over rocks. They pretty well stuck together. There would be times when Frank would disappear, and that's a fairly typical behavior of male bears, is, as they begin to develop and gain experience, they're the ones that are more likely to kind of leave the range in which they grew up. They travel much farther, and so we did kind of lose Frank at some point in 2015, at which point Amber was on her own. And this bear, you notice she's sitting on these logs, and you look just behind her butt, there's some chain there, and up at the end of the log on the right, there's more chain. Now, you remember, she's a small bear. She gets kicked out of a lot of the prime kind of feeding areas because of all the other bears that are around. And now she doesn't even have Frank with her. And so she had to get crafty. And something that she discovered, this is a learned behavior. She discovered that the logs that were basically protecting the lodge from waves, the breakwater is what we call it. The logs at a very low tide, like a zero tide, the water would have dropped like 19 feet below high tide. The logs at the end got lifted out of the water, and she's like, whoa, there's mussels underneath. She discovered that underneath on the bottom of these logs, these gigantic logs that are in the water year round, there's huge mussels that are like maybe 3 or 4 inches long, an excellent source of food for a bear that gets pushed out of all the prime feeding areas. And she's the only one that knows about it. And so what she ended up doing for about a week is kind of sneaking on to these logs, because we can't have her on there. Like when we're operating, she cannot be on there. We had to move her off of these logs, but she would just sneak on there, whether it be like very early in the morning or very late at night. And she would reach her arms underneath the logs and pull out clawfuls with her big 3-inch long claws, big clawfuls of these big hardy mussels, and eat them on the log. And this behavior basically helped her get through 2015, when she's this really small, inexperienced bear with the absence of her brother. She basically went and she learned this behavior herself, and it's something that only this bear had ever done. And we have not seen it replicated by any other bear at Night Island Lodge in like 25 years. So super, super smart, super intelligent learner right there. Here's another picture of Amber, again, kind of down eating the mussels and the barnacles. She spent a lot of time in 2015 eating mussels and barnacles because she couldn't get into the high quality food areas, being such a small bear. And then right at the end of 2015, the very last time that I went out to look for bears, it was just kind of symbolic. The very last time that I was on a bear viewing trip, on that for that entire season, and the very last 2-hour session that I was out looking for grizzlies, who came and did a little swim around, but none other than Amber. And this is kind of right at the end of the summer. We're looking at like mid to late October, and she's starting to, you can tell by the size of her body, she's gotten quite chunky. So she's in good shape, ready for hibernation, or getting close to ready for hibernation. And she came up here looking to see if there's any more salmon that she could procure before going to search elsewhere for food. So 2016, I'm going to say this was a really interesting year as well. And I'm going to go ahead and say sub-adulthood kind of again, because, you know, the transitions with bears are not super rigid. You know, it's not like she's 2.5 years old, so now she's on her own, she does this. She's 3.5, she's on her own, so now she does this. It's kind of wishy-washy in that sense. So 2016, she is now 3.5 years old. She's still a very young bear. But her and Frank again linked up in the springtime. So for a lot of 2016, in particular the spring months, her and Frank were sighted all over the place. I think Frank, and I'll describe this in some pictures that are coming up, Frank was more, again, he was being more bold and trying to like move away. But Amber, still not a huge bear. You can tell she's getting older. Like look at the muscular kind of features of her shoulders there. She's getting bigger and stronger, and she's definitely working her way to kind of operating on her own without a problem. And she gets there. She does get there for sure. But because she was such a small bear, it took her a little bit longer than you would expect. But she still wanted to kind of hang out with Frank that year. But Frank didn't really want much of it. And then there was also some other bears around that didn't really want her around Frank. Here, I just love this shot of her sitting in the sedge. She ate a lot of sedge. But that's also nice because you remember from 2015, very rarely was she able to even get into the area where they ate sedge because she would get pushed away by the other bears. So it's great to see that she made it into the sedge and can kind of hold her own as an older sub-adult bear. However, Amber on the left and Frank on the right, and you can see just by this the size difference. Like Frank is like a good foot or so longer from the rump to the nose, and Amber is kind of a short, stocky bear. Frank is also taller. They're standing like right next to each other within a few inches, so it's a pretty good kind of scale comparison here. But they still hung out together, and they still tolerated each other despite being solitary creatures, which is really cool. This is just a nice photo of Amber that I took in June of 2016, 3.5 years old. She was actually very close to Frank, and Frank had other things on his mind. And I'll use this picture here. This is one of my favorite all-time pictures that I've ever taken. There's a lot going on in this image. Amber is on the left, up on the rock. The bear that is down on the right, this dark bear, that is a female bear that we call Flora. I've mentioned her already. Out of the picture on the right hand, to my right, is Frank. Excuse me. And Frank is sitting in some sedge, eating sedge calmly, while Flora, who is a year older than Amber, she's 4.5, is trying to push Amber away. Now, Amber was kind of following these two, so something's going on, right? They're almost adults, or what we would classify as adults. Females typically reach breeding age around 5 to 7. Males typically they're capable of breeding at 5 to 7, but really they typically don't get access until 8 to 10, or sometimes older, depending on their size. And so what we're seeing here is Frank was sitting off in the sedge over to the right, and he had been actually courted in a way. It was so bizarre because this female is older than him. Frank is 3.5. The female is older than him, and the female was kind of like courting Frank, trying to get him interested in breeding. And there was some like attempts at it, but nothing really solid that we observed that year. It was like, yeah, nothing that we would classify as a successful breeding attempt happened that year, but there was a lot of really, really close calls and a lot of young bears not really knowing what they were doing at all. But Amber was kind of like tailing her brother, not quite ready to separate from Frank. And Flora, who was kind of interested in Frank at that time, decided to use her larger size and her posturing there. You see the head down like that and the ears back, and then Amber up on this rock. So Flora basically kind of like started chuffing and walking towards Amber, and Amber slowly walked away. But Amber got to this rock, went up onto the high point, which is another sign that that bear is stressed. And she made it to that high point, and that was kind of it. They both froze in this position for 2 minutes as they kind of like shifted their feet a little bit. And then eventually, when Flora realized that Amber wasn't going to move, I mean, Amber eventually just laid down and laid on that rock. And Flora kind of was like, well, this isn't working, and then walked back and over to Frank. So it was kind of successful. She managed to push Amber away from Frank for about probably about an hour, but gave them a little bit more space because Flora was interested in trying to breed with Frank. Very interesting to watch. So let's move ahead to 2017. So now Amber is 4.5 years old. She looked a lot different this year, actually, and grizzly bears look a lot different in their potentially in their fur color, fur length, where fur is longer, etc., from year to year. What affects that maybe depends on which patch of winter fur came off first, and a variety of other scenarios. Some of these photos, I didn't actually work in the area in 2017. I was too busy, looking for beluga whales and going to China and all that kind of stuff with NatHab. So I didn't make it into the Great Bear Rainforest that year. But luckily, one of NatHab's other guides, Holly Galloway, was there, as well as my friend and colleague, Dr. Melanie Clapham, was there. So they both graciously shared images from 2017 of what Amber looked like for this presentation. So I put a question mark next to adulthood because on this year, see how different she looks? Like her fur, it looks like her fur is wet. She's also kind of like in that lanky teenage phase. And there's not a lot of fur around her head or her face. So summer coat, short fur, lanky teenage bear, growth spurt kind of thing. Very interesting. But what was really interesting about 2017 is we did observe Amber breeding. And so this bear on the right is a bear that we also recognize. It's a male that comes into the region quite regularly in the spring. It's a bear, also a young male, or a younger male, I think maybe 7 years old in this shot. So it's kind of on the lower end for breeding as well. Definitely not a dominant male bear. But this bear is a bear we call Toffee. And Toffee and Amber were observed copulating on multiple occasions. And so our expectation for 2018 was, hey, is Amber going to come back with cubs? But remember, she's also only 4.5 years old. She's on the lower end of the breeding age, and then Toffee was also on the lower end of the breeding age. So if what they were doing didn't work, or maybe just their inexperience didn't work, or maybe Amber, as can happen with bears, Amber didn't gain enough weight for her body to actually accept the pregnancy. Maybe she didn't get into a good enough condition for that to happen, and maybe she didn't have cubs, or maybe she did, but lost them before she even made it back in the springtime. It's impossible to say. There's too many different options. Either way, it was very interesting to kind of see these two young bears breeding, and then there was zero aftermath. This is Amber in the fall. You can tell, like, if you look at her face now in the fall, she's starting to get kind of that typical Amber look, which is kind of that lighter fur around the face and the short snout, which makes her one of the more easy to recognize bears in the area. So yeah, 2018, I went back there in the spring, and there were no cubs. Everyone was expecting cubs, but there were no cubs. And so 2018 was kind of an interesting year. She spent the entire year by herself. Frank had disappeared. Actually, Frank had disappeared in 2017 as well. We didn't really see him. 2018, Frank was not around. Bella was still around, and she had a different set of cubs. Amber and Bella, once a cub is weaned, they don't really spend time together anymore. There's definitely research being done to see, can a female recognize offspring from a few years ago, or a decade ago, or 15 years ago, based on their scent. It would be, or even, facial recognition. It's hard to say, but there's definitely research being done into that, which is one of the many unanswered questions about bears and grizzly bears in general that I'd love to get to the bottom of. So she showed up and she didn't have any cubs. She spent the entire season kind of roaming around and feeding and getting herself in really great condition. She spent a lot of time in like the high quality food areas. So all of that little bear stuff that was going on when she was younger, no longer an issue. She's now 5.5 years old. She's a strong, healthy bear, working her way up the dominance hierarchy. And in 2018, we also saw her. We also saw her in the presence of a male, but I don't believe that there was much breeding activity that was seen. So it's kind of interesting that there was breeding the year before, but now when she's 5.5 and kind of in that breeding window, there was not any. But bears are full of surprises. So 2019 breeding. This bear, guess who? It's Toffee again. So Amber on the left, you can tell she's getting much bigger. She's now 6.5 years old in this picture, and she is a strong, healthy female. And on the right, you've got Toffee, who would be in the nine or so range. So they're both kind of right into the correct range the correct range, the suggested breeding range of a grizzly bear. And they did spend a lot of time together. So Toffee on the left, Amber on the right. Toffee was courting Amber. I have other pictures too where Toffee kind of gets discouraged and turns around, then Amber like goes back and follows him, being like, hey, wait, don't obviously kind of interested in what the body's telling her to do here. So there was multiple occasions over the course of a couple weeks where we saw these bears together. Here's another one, kind of in the shade, and it does look, if you look closely at this picture, kind of at the rear end of Amber, it does look like there's a lot less fur on her rump, which could suggest that the male bear, Toffee, kind of got up and mounted her, and then just the repeated copulation, which bears do, can take off that long winter coat that they both still have. And so that would be kind of what's a sign that they have copulated. I didn't actually see them breeding. I saw some attempted mounts, but I didn't see them breeding at all that year. I think some other guides did, and we saw them together so much that we can only assume that they did in 2019. Lots of this kind of courting behavior. So, but what was really interesting about that is Toffee there was actually a large abundance of females without cubs. So something that ties into that year was in 2019 is the previous season had a fairly low salmon run. And so it was and this was like up and down the coast of British Columbia. And so a lot of bears had a really hard time having any cubs and raising cubs because there was not enough food to get them through the winter, like not enough food to get themselves plus a couple extra, new growth or new cubs through the winter. So a lot of cubs were lost, and a lot of cubs just weren't born because of kind of a lack of high nutrient, high protein, high fat food source in the fall. And so there was a lot of breeding females around. And there's this one time in 2019, I saw Toffee with 3 separate females. And there was Amber, there was, I think Flora was one of them, so she would be a bit older. And then there was another bear that we called Cleo for Cleo Channel, which is a channel of water, or a body of water just to the north of us, or to the west of us rather. But there was a lot of different females around, and so how much attention she ended up getting is uncertain. And also in 2020, no report of cubs, so not sure exactly how that worked out for her. So let's go to 2020, where Amber kind of got her next thrust into the limelight, which is this Bear ID project. So my friend Dr. Melanie Clapham, in conjunction with some researchers in the Silicon Valley, or the developers in the Silicon Valley, basically built this program that can use AI to identify grizzly bears just by their face. Now, the implications for this are immense, like for grizzly bear management, and it all ties in to kind of what I am basically saying. Like, there's this one individual bear that I've been talking to you for an hour about, and that's just a glimpse into what her life has been about. This, as far as, in my opinion, as far as from a management perspective, could be useful in identifying, bears that maybe are getting into garbage, or bears that have been showing up in areas, or if there was maybe some folks got into a bear incident and they got a picture of the bear. They can use the facial shot of a bear from a camera trap, or from a DSLR, or telephoto lens kind of thing, or whatever, input it into the system, and they can match it to another bear, or to that bear if their pictures are already in that system. And so if you can imagine having bears, pictures of bears from all over British Columbia, and having kind of like this registry of bears, you can say, oh yeah, this bear, there's no need for a DNA test. There's no need for collecting a hair sample or anything. We don't need to shoot this bear or anything. We just need to take a picture, and we can get a bit of a life history going on that bear, which is pretty incredible. Tie facial recognition in with potentially DNA analysis. You can get an idea of family structure and genetic diversity within populations. We actually at Night Inlet Lodge with Dr. Melanie Clapham and John Kitchen over some time, they collected, as well as other researchers over decades, they collected hair samples and DNA analysis and paired those with facial images. So we actually have a really great DNA sample for Amber. We know who she's related to. We know how interrelated she is within this particular population unit, tie that in, all that information that's behind this one bear to a picture, and then duplicate that in different regions, and the amount of information that's possible, and the amount of bears that may see an untimely end due to poor management may change, because we have excellent research like this. It also, yeah, it's just going to be something really interesting to watch, and obviously the world got excited about it internationally and nationally, because every major news media outlet picked this one up, and it's really exciting stuff. And guess who's one of the bears front and center? Of course, it's Amber. So there you go. So far, it's recognized 132 of the animals individually, which is pretty incredible. And that's been a lot of hard work. I remember Dr. Melanie Clapham talking about this back in 2016, getting something like this going. So it was really, really exciting. If you want to learn more about that, head to bearresearch.org. Should be an easy one to remember. And that's Amber, of course. So in closing, I just want to share this super cool picture that I took, I think back in 2014. We've got a Pacific white-sided dolphin down here on the left, and we have a grizzly bear up in the top right corner there. So that is Amber. Amber was feeding on mussels and barnacles. This is when she was very young, so she would have been pushed kind of out of the main feeding area. And you can just look at that terrain and how steep and challenging it is. And that's kind of what she's left to deal with, because anywhere that's easy to find food, she was kind of getting the boot from. But I was sitting there, I was a good 75 yards or more from Amber. I was sitting there watching her feeding and kind of doing her thing. And then I heard the blows coming from a group of Pacific white-sided dolphins, and I could see that they were swimming kind of in this general direction. And so I'm just like, okay, I'm going to try to get this picture. So I zoomed way out. This photo is very cropped. I zoomed way out to get as much of the picture in focus as I could, and just focused on the water right where that dolphin is before the dolphin showed up. So I had pre-focused and just kind of like waited, and the dolphin came up, click, click, click. And then I quickly reviewed my shot, and I couldn't believe that what I had been so interested in, this dolphin that was swimming through Night Inlet, had also caught the interest of Amber, and she is looking directly at that dolphin. Just a really fond memory and a really fun picture that I wanted to share with you. So in closing, when it comes to, like, there's such a history behind this one individual bear, and I could go and kind of do a similar presentation about many of the different bears that I've had the opportunity to see. There's so much behind each bear. There's a lifetime of experiences behind each bear. There's a lifetime of learning behind each bear. And if more people were to recognize that, maybe the compassion and understanding and kind of willingness to have more protections for grizzly bears or black bears and these learning animals that are incredibly patient and tolerant around people, maybe more people will have an appreciation for that. North America, we love our bears. There's sports teams named after bears. There's stadiums named after bears. Bears feature really, really strongly in artwork and in photography, of course, and in movies and documentaries. We're all super fascinated by these bears, and it's not just in North America, it's globally. And so I really wish that our interest and our interest in these animals also translated into their protection and their conservation. And so that's kind of my goal, is by adding a life story to an animal, maybe we can all think a little bit more about the next time you hear a story about some vicious bear crashing through the woods and somebody apparently, running for their life. Those accidents do happen, but I've also seen that exact same story come from a bear walking down the road very calmly, and then a person thinking that that bear was going to eat them. So that's the mindset we need to change, and that's the mindset I want to change and look at differently. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Special thanks to these folks here. So the Bear ID project, I just threw out Instagram handles here because they're easy to find, and you can get kind of their website or whatever, or more information about each of these individuals on there. So Bear ID project, amazing research going in with the Bear ID, and of course Amber is front and center in there, her face, and also Frank and Bella are part of that program. Dr. Melanie Clapham, who is the kind of one of the minds behind the Bear ID project, a good friend of mine, and excellent rep for bears, at Melanie Clapham, or you can go to understandingbears.com. And then special thanks to Mel as well for allowing me to use some of her pictures in this presentation. And then Holly Galloway, who is one of Nat Hab's expedition leaders, also gave me some pictures to use in this presentation. So thank you, Holly. Arctos Arts on Instagram, if you'd like to follow her. Excuse me. And then a special shout out to Night Inlet Lodge, because that's where I met or saw this bear for the first time, and that is the community in which I was able to foster a real passion and love for grizzly bears alongside some incredible colleagues over the last 7 years. And I look forward to a fruitful relationship with them in the future. So you can find them at Night Inlet Lodge on Instagram. So with that, thank you very much. If you want to find me, you can find me at Eddie Savage BC, etc. It's all on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. That was fantastic. I just want to remind everyone watching, if you have a question for Eddie, we're going to stick around for another 10 or 15 minutes, so you can submit those questions in the control panel under the questions field. All right, first question. Excuse me. So when you were talking about that new AI technology for bear facial recognition, is it only usable on grizzlies right now, or are they planning on expanding to other bears?
That would be a great question for me to follow up with Dr. Melanie Clapham on. But my understanding is that it used over 4,000 images that were gathered by Dr. Melanie Clapham from this population of bears. And right now, like that population, there's about 60 individuals within that population that we have DNA sampling for and pictures for. And so it's kind of, we're able to really build that project, or like build that database quite well. And then replicating that among other grizzly bear populations would be good to do as well. I don't know if they have plans to further that with black bears. In British Columbia, the numbers of grizzlies, kind of the estimates vary between 6,000 and 15,000 depending on who you ask, whereas our black bear numbers are between 100 and 120,000. And so I would think that Dr. Melanie Clapham, who is a grizzly bear biologist and specialist and researcher, would focus on the grizzly bears for now. And then of course, in the future, it'd be great to see it spread out to other bear species and work on management that way. I think that there's definitely room for that, but I wasn't much a part of the project myself. I'm just kind of speculating, which is always fun. Thank you.
You talked about Amber and Frank meeting up several times throughout their lives. Can you speak a little bit about how they're able to recognize each other?
So that again is one of the mysteries of how they're able to like how that happens. It's one of the mysteries of bears. What I can tell you is that bears have incredible smell recognition and incredible sense of smell. You know, you've probably heard things like 1,000 times greater than us, or like 7 times greater than a Doberman. But there's one thing that I like to say about bears, and that is, if a leaf falls in the woods, if a leaf falls in the woods, the deer hears it, the eagle sees it, and the bear smells it. So I would kind of say that it's likely a scent recognition. And some of the research that's been done actually by Dr. Melanie Clapham on scent marking trees and that kind of thing. These trees in the woods that bears mark on, and then they leave a chemical signal on there that other bears can recognize. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding that as well, like what is left behind in those signals, or in that chemical scent. There is definitely room, in my imagination at least, to think that the bears can identify each other by scent quite readily. And so to identify your sibling, somebody who you've spent years with, based on a scent, it'd probably be pretty good. Another thing that sometimes I like to reference is, like, just think about scent and memory. Think about if, there's sometimes a smell that you smell that takes you back to when you were 7 years old, or there's sometimes a smell that you smell that takes you back to a memory that's not so fond. Our human brains, at least, are incredibly linked to scent. And so bear brains with a much greater sense of smell, there's a high likelihood that they are incredibly well linked together as well. So that's kind of my explanation of that. Is it a solid fact yet? No. Is it speculative? Yeah, I think it could be.
That's fascinating. So there are a couple questions about the mother and cub dynamic. So I'll combine them. Does a mother push away both male and female cubs at the same time? And how does a mother push the cubs away? How does she tell them it's time to go off on their own?
It's so yes, I'll answer the first one. Yes, they push the mom and cubs away both at the same time. There's no favoring, and there actually has been some research about, like, does a female favor a male cub over a female cub, or favor a female over a male cub, like when it comes to suckling and rearing of those cubs? And the answer is no. They treat them essentially equally. What it comes down to in that sense would be kind of like the own vigor of each individual cub, so that the kind of like that will to live, or the want to live or survive, would kind of define whether or not they get more attention from mom. But when mom, so she kicks them out at the same time, and when she kicks them out, it basically is kind of like mom just decides that she's chasing them away, and she will charge them, she will chase them, she will vocalize at them, she might even swat them, but basically keeping that distance, pushing. And it's not like it's something that happens in an afternoon. It could take weeks. I even observed once, a female kicked out her cubs, and her cubs followed her around for the entire year. She actually kicked them out a year early, but she kicked them out, and she had been breeding with another male and constantly chasing these two young bears away for the entire season. We're talking 6 months from late May until October. And then towards the end of the season, they actually started hanging out again together. And they were the cubs that were kind of on their own, kind of not. The weaning process was uncertain, and it took quite some time. And then there's some bears that won't wean their cubs until the cubs are 3.5, 4.5 years old, depending on the environment in which they're in, because bears are products of their environment. But the process can take a long time, and it's a lot of that chasing and swatting and vocalization, and just no more, you're done. It's cut off, and then they won't associate together anymore ever again, most likely.
Wow.
But I'd leave that as an unknown because maybe they will 10 years down the road. And I have heard, gosh, bears are so fascinating in this sense, and I have heard stories about older bears coming back and potentially babysitting younger cubs, in some way. I haven't read a paper about it, but I've heard stories about it happening. And with some of the things that I've seen with grizzly bears and polar bears and black bears, I wouldn't doubt it at all. Because every time you answer one question, there's 100 more that are left unanswered.
That's amazing. So there's a lot of curiosity about what are some of the most common reasons that cubs die in their first year?
Oh gosh, this one is it's a tricky question. And one thing that I do want to address is, and I bet it's in like right at the front of everyone's brain right now, is infanticide, or like cub mortality from male bears or other bears. That is actually a very rare form of cub death. Some of them could be just simply inexperienced parent. And so there's an example, which is a bear that I observed. I didn't see it happen, but this is a very well-versed documented story that happened. It was a young female with her, she had two cubs, brand new cubs, and quite simply, you know, like let's just consider the strength of a female bear, a 300-pound female bear. She can one arm roll over a 200-pound rock without even flinching. And so the amount of strength that's in her paw could break a horse's neck. It could, if she was to swat a human, it could throw a human 10 feet, 20 feet, like maybe not 20, but you know, it could like make a human go airborne pretty easily with that strength. And so one simple thing would just be like the accidental over punishment, and that happened to a bear. That happened to one of the cubs that I or one of the females that I observe regularly. Another option could just simply be a shortage of food. It could be the changing environment. It could be in some areas where there's trophy hunting, it could be somebody trophy hunting a bear without knowing that there's cubs nearby. That could result in the mortalities. Something could happen to the mom. There is like I said, a very rare instance of male infanticide, so the males killing the cubs. But I've also seen, or not seen myself, but being there when a female, another female killed a cub that had run off on its own. So the females can also be culprits of that. Yeah, and then quite simply, and I've observed this, we had high rain in the fall, and a mom with 3 cubs swam across the river when the water was rushing, and mom makes it no problem because she's probably touching the bottom, but 2 of her cubs made it with her, and one of them got washed down the river. In that story, they did end up reuniting, but it's like these are kind of some of the things that can happen. You know, it's a big world, it's a hard world. You know, and an extremely rare one as well might be predation by wolves, but that's like super rare. I've read a story about a wolf basically kind of surrounding a female with cubs and like trying to get the cub to chase the wolf into the bushes. And like the female's doing what she can to try to keep the wolf away, but the cub's curiosity gets the better of them. The cub runs into the bushes, and then all the wolf has to do is injure the cub, and then the mom will likely abandon it, and then, at which point it would be prey. But that's an extremely rare occurrence as well. So there's a whole variety of factors that could result in kind of that 50% cub mortality.
Wow. All right, well, I'm going to call it there with questions. Eddie, this has been such an incredible presentation, so I thank you so much for taking the time to share the story with us. I'm going to hand it back over to you for closing comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Obviously, you know, I hope you learned a lot about this bear, and you've taken away a great appreciation for this bear, and also kind of the progression of a cub to an adult. And where that is. This particular bear is an exceptional one, but all bears are exceptional in my opinion. I guess the last thing I want to say is I've got a webinar scheduled for December 29th, and I love talking about all things. But if you've got any ideas, you've been inspired by this webinar or past webinars of mine, or maybe there's a topic that you want me to touch further on, if you could just write those in the comments, that would be great. And then we can kind of get a short list of presentations for me to do. I mean, I've got lots of ideas, but I also want to hear from all of you and see what kind of stuff might interest you, and I can put something together. Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and also feel free, for those watching, feel free to send us an email at webinars@nathab.com with your ideas as well. All right, well, thank you so much again, Eddie. This was really fascinating. I loved hearing this story about Amber and her family. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.